I'm going to begin today by telling you a story about the moment in which I fully realized that the world in which I am raising my own two children is very different from the world in which I grew up. So this story takes place a few years ago at dinner time on a school night in the grocery store where I was shopping with my two small children. Now, I know it's not a great idea to bring your hungry, cranky, tired children into the grocery store at dinner time when the lines are really long, but there I was, and so it's no surprise that my children weren't actually behaving all that well. In fact, my older daughter, Fiona, who was at the time maybe 6 or 7, was systematically putting things I really didn't want into the grocery cart. And as we turned down to the cereal aisle, I realized I really needed to get the situation under control. So I decided to employ a technique of my own mother's, which was very effective with my brother and I. We called it the grocery store grab or the supermarket squeeze. So I leaned over and I grabbed Fiona's arm just above the elbow, gave it a little squeeze, and looked her right in the eye and told her to knock it off. Now, if my mother had done this to my brother or I, we would have totally knocked it off. But unfortunately, at that moment for me, Fiona did not have the same response. She looked at me, eyes wide open, in total shock, and started yelling in the grocery store, "You are hurting my body! Why would a mother hurt her child's body? Mommy, use your words." So Fiona had right there, for me and everyone else in the grocery store, as it turns out, illustrated just how much has changed about our parenting and our concepts of authority in the span of just one generation. Clearly, what worked for my mother was not going to work for me with this kid. Now, Fiona had evoked this real sort of old school parenting moment for me. Old school parenting is really all about hierarchy and rank and power. There is a lot of, there's really clear authority. But there's not a lot of questioning in old school parenting. Old school parenting is also really about achievement. And by achievement, I mean that it's really a narrow focus on the end result, on the grade, on the test score, or the win, and not so much about the journey or the process or what it took to get there. So let me back up and say, I have a great mother. She really put up with a lot from me. I was so sensitive as a child and so painfully shy, believe it or not, and so easily frustrated that basically I just cried all the time. I remember vividly the day midway through my second grade, midway through the year in second grade, in which I had the first school day ever in which I didn't cry. So this was a huge triumph for me. So you can imagine what my poor mom had on her hands. Well, I think she did a pretty good job in the sense that I turned out a surprisingly outgoing and definitely teacher-pleasing person. But by the time I was in my late 20s and expecting my first child, Fiona, I have to admit, I was still a worrier, a sort of tightly wound, overachieving perfectionist that, and I knew that with my first baby on the way, something had to give. So I had this idea that much like my own mother had rigged my schooling so that I always got all the good teachers, I would rig my children's childhood for happiness. And so I did this in my own kind of overachieving way, which was to get my PhD in sociology, studying the sociology of happiness in childhood at UC Berkeley. Now, I'm going to cut to the chase here and tell you the net of what I learned in the last decade of study on happiness is that the fundamental skill for happiness is compassion. And that if what we want is to raise happy children, what we need to do is foster their compassionate imaginations. So to me, the compassionate imagination has three components to it, or it takes three real things. The first thing's pretty obvious. It's empathy, or an emotional literacy. The second thing is kindness, or a real generosity of spirit. And the third thing is creativity, and the time for play that creativity takes. Now, I was fostering none of these things in my old school parenting moment with Fiona in the grocery store. That was that parenting that was really focused on hierarchy and rank and achievement. Now, the new type of parenting, a parenting or teaching that would foster the compassionate imagination, is one that's all about dialogue and empathy. It's about deep feeling and deep learning and listening. Now, these two things, the old school focus on achievement and then a new compassionate parenting, are totally at odds with one another. That when we pressure children to achieve and to succeed, we dull their compassionate imaginations. And when we stifle their compassionate imaginations, we really dull their emotional intelligence and their sources of inspiration and their very ability to be happy. So while we parents often say that we just want our children to be happy, but as a society, we are really acting as though what we most want out of children is for them to perform and to achieve. And this has a real consequence. We are raising a generation of children who are increasingly anxious and depressed and turning to medications in their search for happiness. So where this leaves us is with a real choice. If we keep doing what we're doing, we are going to be raising a generation of kids who are trained on that end result. We can keep giving them grades and ranking them against each other and forcing them to take standardized tests that determine the fate of their schools and their teachers and their own future education. Or we can raise a generation of children that know in their heart of hearts that we value their kindness and their character above everything else. So which of these things do you choose? More importantly, in your everyday actions, how do you show the children in your lives which of these things you choose? I believe that this is a question which won't just make us happier. This is a question which can, I believe, change the world. Thank you.